Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, December the 23rd, 2024. Today is the 111th birthday of the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is, of course, the United States' central bank. And, I'm not a great expert on economics, but the Federal Reserve plays an important role in the United States' economy, indeed in the global economy. It has a role in setting interest rates and monitoring employment. One of its goals is to make sure that as many people as possible are employed, and that also making sure that the economy doesn't overheat. And so we've just had the Federal Reserve making decisions about interest rates, saying that it's going to reduce them by 0.25%, and then it said it was unlikely to reduce interest rates by very much in 2025, and that has a huge impact on the market. So what the Federal Reserve does and says, it's jawboning. In other words, for example, the chair of the Federal Reserve, who's currently Jerome Powell, might say something and just trying to give an impression, and everyone jumps at his words. And so it does matter. And of course, it has its critics. Some people say it shouldn't exist, and that it's actually a very destructive thing, the Federal Reserve. Why is it that this organization can have so much control over, indeed, the global economy? So I want to look at the Federal Reserve's horoscope and consider what's happening at the moment with the Federal Reserve, what transits is the Federal Reserve about to experience, and also to test it, to see if past events have had any impact, or at least whether past events have shown up in the Federal Reserve's chart. I also want to look at Jerome Powell's chart, because I know that he is just one member of the the board or whatever of the Federal Reserve, but he is the chair, and I think that what happens to his chart may have an impact on the Federal Reserve and may have an impact on how well the Federal Reserve is working. And maybe I'll also have another look at at other Federal Reserve chairs in the past. For example, Paul Volcker, who put up interest rates massively in 1979 through to 1981, I think. But anyway, I will be looking at the Federal Reserve. But first of all, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, December the 23rd, 2024. So there, top right, that is Jerome Powell, and there's a flag of a seal of the Federal Reserve behind him. So looking at what's happening today, and the chart of today set for noon, December the 23rd, and the moon is in Libra. Moon is at 10 degrees Libra, so that means that we have an air emphasis here. We've got Moon in Libra, we've got Jupiter in Gemini, we've got Venus in Aquarius. So we sort of have a bit of a grand trine in air. It's not an exact grand trine in air, and maybe the grand trine in air will be more tomorrow than today. But with Jupiter, Venus, and the Moon in air signs, and Pluto, of course, Pluto is in Aquarius, there will perhaps be a intellectual and mental flow. We'll be able to talk. People will be able to say what's on their minds, and maybe people won't be too emotional. We've got Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, but we don't have any personal planets in water signs. So perhaps the emphasis will be on conversation and keeping it relatively light. Now, the moon is going to move into the Via Combusta at some stage. So the Via Combusta is that part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. And when the moon is in moving through the Via Combusta, things can just happen, and things may be difficult to predict. But the Via Combusta doesn't happen until the moon hits 15 Libra, so the moon is only at 10 degrees Libra. So the Via Combusta is going to be more about tomorrow, Tuesday, and afterwards. Of course, the moon in the Via Combusta becomes more intense when the moon switches from moon moves from Libra from Libra into Scorpio. So that will be something that's happening over Christmas. So that's something to look forward to, isn't it? And the moon is making a number of fortunate aspects. You can see that the moon is making a sextile to Mercury, and then it makes a trine to Jupiter and a trine to Venus. I mean, that moon sextile Mercury is likely to be particularly strong. And the moon sextile Mercury is about being able to talk. The words flow freely, and whatever is on our mind, we should be able to say it in a way that doesn't cause too much offence. And then the moon moves on towards that trine to Jupiter. So moon sextile Mercury then moves on to the trine of Jupiter, and I think that is overall pretty fortunate, and things do move, and we can make things move through the power of our words, but not using too much power. I'm not talking about emotional power, just being able to say the right thing. Having said all that, Mercury is on a fixed star, Antares. And Antares, it's a very clever fixed star, but it can take things too far. We can say too much, and there can be sort of recriminations and anger connected with Mercury in Antares, connected with Mercury conjunct Antares. And if we're not too careful, we might just take things far too far and just cause trouble, which I think is unnecessary. I mean, the moon is sextile Mercury, so that should allow us to communicate in a fairly smooth way. But we just have to bear in mind that Mercury is on Antares, and maybe certain signs are going to be affected more than others. For example, if you're a Gemini or a Virgo, the fact that Mercury is on Antares may have an impact on you. And then we have Sun quintile Saturn. So the Sun and Saturn are 72 degrees apart. And 72 degrees is, of course, 1/5 of the circle. So Sun quintile Saturn can be about discipline, the attempt to create discipline. Maybe not a natural discipline because it's a quintile, but we might have an idea about how we're trying to organize things, how we're trying to get ourselves together, and we have a vision of it. And the Sun quintile Saturn may allow us to make a conscious effort to create an organized environment. So even if we are a little bit chaotic and ill-disciplined, that Sun quintile Saturn may indicate that through the strength of our own will, we can change the situation round. It's perhaps an uneasy organization. We're trying our hardest to keep things together, but somehow we're able to pull it off. We've got to be strong and we've got to be very focused, but I do think overall that Sun quintile Saturn is a fairly fortunate influence. So that's the position of the planets set for New York at noon. If we set it for sort of Sydney at noon, the moon is that much earlier at noon on the 23rd. It's at 2 degrees Libra. So that means this morning the moon could be in Virgo, especially if you're in New Zealand. So you might actually experience a sign change from moon moving from Virgo to Libra. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, the main aspect is probably moon trine sun. Moon in Moon square Sun. Moon in Libra making a square to the Sun. So that's the last quarter moon, and you may feel a little bit of tension there, but with the Sun and the Moon, a feeling that you have to get something together because it's the last quarter. It's going to be the new moon soon. When's the new moon? I think it's in December the 30th, isn't it? We've got a new moon December the 30th. December the 30th, 31st, there's a new moon. And so there may be a little bit of a sense that something has to be done, but the question is, how is it going to be done? Because the moon makes a square to the Sun, and then you have to wait for the moon to make the sextile to Mercury. So if you are in Australia and New Zealand, as the moon moves into Libra, you may feel a certain sense of panic, a feeling that this is a last chance, but don't worry about it. The moon will eventually make that sextile to Mercury, and you'll have a chance to get things together, and I think your brain will click into gear. And then there is the heliocentric picture. So heliocentrically, there are actually quite a lot of midpoints, and that's perhaps the real issue. I won't say an issue, but let me just look at the heliocentric. A lot of midpoints, not so many. Sorry, that's the wrong one. So the main heliocentric aspect is Mercury opposition Saturn, and there you can see Mercury is at 21 Virgo, and there is Saturn at 19 Pisces. So it's applying to that, to an opposition of Saturn, and that can make things somewhat slow, and it contrasts with the fact that we've got Moon sextile Mercury geocentrically, but we've got Mercury opposition Saturn heliocentrically, and Mercury opposition Saturn may be about ideas that we are wrestling with, and it doesn't make immediate sense, and we're kind of wondering how best to work it through. And so there may be a feeling in some quarters with Mercury opposition Saturn that things could be better. And I think we're reminded that Mercury geocentrically, it may be making a sextile to the moon, but it's actually starting to apply to a square of Saturn geocentrically. And so I think many of us may be getting a dawning sense of reality, that something has to be dealt with. And I know it's Christmas, but you can't be helped, can it? The planets don't make a special allowance for Christmas. They just keep on moving. And I don't know, I'll be looking at Christmas Day pretty soon, in a couple of days' time. But astrologically, off the top of my head, I don't think actually Christmas Day is necessarily particularly good. I think that great. We've got Moon in Scorpio on Christmas. Moon moving from Libra into Scorpio on Christmas Day, via combustor. So I'll be looking at Christmas Day in further details. But just an advance warning. My feeling is that Christmas Day, all things being equal, may be a more difficult Christmas than usual. But anyway, I'm jumping the gun. Mercury's opposition Saturn. There are things to consider which may be quite serious. But still, it is a time when we want to make things happen, because the Earth. Look at the Earth. Earth at 2 degrees Cancer. Earth at 2 degrees Cancer is moving onto the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. You see Mars and Jupiter on either side of the Earth. So with Earth on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, there is going to be a sense that we do want things to happen. We want to make things happen. And I suppose in terms of governments, organizations, armies, militaries, this is a time when you have to make an impact. Let's get our offensive off the ground. Let's take the initiative. Let's see what we can do. Of course, it's not a good time for taking offensives because Mars is retrograde. But still, Earth conjunct the Mars Jupiter conjunction. Earth on the Mars Jupiter midpoint might encourage us to go too far, perhaps because we feel a sense of frustration and we just feel that something has to happen, and we may believe that we have to say something. If we don't say something, well, we might miss our chance. So that is another way in which it could work out. And also we continue to have Neptune on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. Just a reminder. I mean, it's not that this Neptune on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint is especially strong today because these are slow-moving planets, but there's Neptune, and there's Uranus, there's Pluto. You can see that Neptune is on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. So Uranus-Pluto is about the desire for massive power to really make things happen, and we might really want to make things happen, but are we going to be able to get away with it? I mean, it's possible, but we have to be aware that things could happen and we lose control. Though I do think that Neptune on a Uranus-Pluto midpoint is more collective. It's about larger forces at work. Now, one final aspect I should point out is Mars on the Venus-Mercury midpoint. So you can see there's Venus and Mercury. Venus at 8 degrees Taurus, Mercury at 21 Virgo. So heliocentrically, we've got Mars on the Venus-Mercury midpoint. So this may be an opportunity to do something that is really special to us. And, we've talked about all these things that perhaps might irritate us, or a suggestion that things might be irritating. But the question is, where are we going to put our focus? Where are we going to concentrate our energies? And with Mars on the Venus-Mercury midpoint, or the Mercury-Venus midpoint, I would have said, try to put your energies into something creative, something that doesn't necessarily need anyone's help. I think it is a rather tense time, at least that's indicated by the heliocentric chart. Just doing something that's important to us that doesn't need anyone's help, doesn't need anyone's approval, might be a good idea. So heliocentrically, there are quite a few things going on, especially when we look at the midpoints. So now I want to look at the 12 signs and go through the 12 signs from Aries through to Pisces. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, December the 23rd, 2024. Aries, the moon is now out of Virgo and it's into Libra, and the moon, as it moves through early Libra, makes a sextile to Mars. In fact, when I was doing the introduction, looking at the main aspects, the moon sextile Mars is something I missed. But yes, the moon is making a sextile to Mars, and that moon sextile Mars gives you new energy and a new impetus to do stuff, and that might have been missing over the last few days. Perhaps Aries, you felt that there were things that needed to be done. Perhaps they were rather boring, or maybe there were distractions. Other people had demands on you and you couldn't really say no. But now with moon sextile Mars, you're able to get things moving. And I think that you, by and large, will be helped, or at least can be helped by other people, because the moon is in Libra, and Libra is your opposite sign, and so that might indicate that if you're prepared to trust people, you might be surprised to the upside. You might find that people are able to deliver where perhaps in the past they hadn't been able to deliver. And the moon, having made a sextile to Mars, makes a sextile to Mercury. So in fact, the moon is on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. And so with moon on a Mercury-Mars midpoint, that does indicate action, particularly mental and verbal action. And that might mean that, okay, it could mean furious conversations, people having lots of things to say, but there's something quite constructive about it, quite dynamic about it. And with moon sextile Mercury, I think it's a time where the words really flow. And so if there's anything that perhaps has been frustrating you, annoying you, getting you down, then I think that you can get things to move. Okay, talking might be one way. Writing should perhaps be considered also. But in general, you have the capacity to create action, and it's nice that Mercury and Sagittarius is in a fire sign, and okay, it's been in a fire sign for some time. It will continue to be in Sagittarius until early next year, and so perhaps it might be a day when you can actually make the most of that Mercury in Sagittarius. And what that Mercury in Sagittarius should mean for you is really something quite exploratory, not having to put up with what's right in front of you. That's not the only thing that matters. You can actually consider new ideas, fresh concepts. You don't have to be satisfied with what's in front of you. So if you want to explore, if you want to consider ideas that in the past might have been unusual, then now might be your chance. So don't hold back. I understand that the world is closing down as we move into Christmas, but it doesn't mean you have to slow down, doesn't mean you have to close down. And as we move towards the end of 2024, mustn't jump the gun, there is the possibility of new knowledge, and as I've already suggested, other people can be useful. This is a time of the last quarter moon. We've got a new moon on December the 30th, December the 31st, right at the end of the year. And so it might feel, Aries, that something should be finished off. You'd like it to be finished off, but it's not quite there, and you're wondering how you're going to do it. And so perhaps, Aries, other people can be useful. They can come to your assistance. You might not feel this is possible, but I think it really is. So I think it's important to give people a chance and try to understand what their stance is, why they might be holding something back. But once you've understood that, you can really interact with them with a considerable amount of energy and get them on board, and also, I think, benefit from their creative and inspirational input. Taurus, it's a time, Taurus, when you possibly feel that things need to be under control. I think that may be a feeling that you have, that it's so easy for things to get out of control, especially if you don't intervene. You just let things happen in their own way, which I think you have a certain inclination to do. I think you think other people want to do their stuff. Let them get on with it. Don't ask too many questions, and maybe everything will be fine. But I think you should monitor what is happening. I mean, I'm not saying anything bad is happening. I think it's actually quite a good day, in fact. But you want to make sure that everything is in order, but you don't want to try too hard. And I think in terms of the social environment, it is a time of year when people are thinking a lot about other people and the way people fit together. And I think that might be something that you are doing at the moment. You want people to get on. Maybe you're trying to organize things for other people, and you're trying to make things as perfect as possible. But really, is perfection a possible ideal? I don't think it is. Not really. I think that you have to allow for the unexpected, remembering that the moon tomorrow, even late today, moves into the Vircombustor, that part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio, and the moon will be in the Vircombustor over Christmas. And so when you've got the moon in the Vircombustor, yeah, things just happen. You make careful plans, but they can get wrecked. Nothing can be done. Other people are a law unto themselves. Events happen. So it's just important that you are aware of this and you don't try too hard to make other people happy. In fact, in some respects, with the moon making a conjunction to the south node and obviously making an opposition to the north node, in some respects it might be a good idea if you really don't have any preconceived ideas or plans, or as few as possible, because in that way you are giving yourself flexibility. But of course it's true, Taurus, that I think you're going to want things to be properly organized, and so you kind of have to get the balance right. Yeah, you have your own needs, and I suppose there are some basic needs for organization and things to be properly set out, but don't worry too much about the social dimension. It perhaps doesn't matter as much as you think it does. And Taurans can so often be disappointed by other people, and that's because Taurans just get worried. They do something like they try to organize something really properly. They make a lot of effort, and then they're disrespected, or someone doesn't want to fit into their organizational plans in the way they'd hoped, and then Taurus gets really annoyed. So do be aware of that and just allow things to happen and create the possibility of things happening that were unexpected, and just be able to deal with a little bit of chaos. Now, I'm not actually suggesting that you and other people aren't going to get on. I actually think that you and other people can get on really well, provided you're open-minded and you don't have any preconceptions about what might happen, and you're kind of easygoing. And perhaps also it might be a good idea to have some broader inspiration about what you and other people can do together. And there is a certain emphasis on unity and finding common ground between other people, even people who in the past you haven't got on with. This is something you can achieve. And I think in a wider sense there is, Taurus, a sense of community, a feeling that community is important. Perhaps you're not quite sure how important it is, but I think it is important. And Taurus, you may then have some kind of vision about the way things should be. And this vision may well have some kind of political or ideological edge to it. So we might be seeing something in terms of collective action. So, okay, it's not anything you have to do now, but perhaps it's something you can think about and perhaps talk about. So if you feel that the world needs to be changed, maybe then over Christmas and perhaps the New Year, you can discuss the matter, because a lot of Taurans have a political streak or an ideological streak that And maybe it's time to sort of start to think about getting it out into the open. Gemini. Mercury is on this fixed star Antares at the moment, and it has been on Antares relatively recently, because what's happened is that Mercury went retrograde, and so Mercury's now at 10, 11 Sagittarius. It was actually much further on, just before, at the time it went retrograde, and it had crossed Antares, and now it's going back onto Antares. And so you might get a blast of Antares today. So Antares as a star is, it's intelligent, but it can be troublesome. I mean, Vivian Robeson actually has a section on Antares, and he actually even has a section on Mercury on Antares. And so he says in general that it can be quite destructive. It can be broad-minded but destructive, and it can encourage you towards doing something without thinking it through. And he says about Mercury conjunct Antares. I mean, don't take this too seriously. This is maybe just a bit of fun, just for your amusement. But with Mercury, suspicious, wrongfully accuses friends, unpopular, uses ecclesiastical influence in business, money obtained slowly and with much difficulty, danger of sickness to the native and his family, and death of a relative at home or away. Please don't take that too seriously. I'm just reading it out of a book. I'm not putting it in context, but you can see that Mercury conjunct Antares just might make you somewhat rash. You do things without thinking about them. By the way, I'm a Gemini, so don't feel that I'm just being mean to you by pointing out that Mercury is on Antares. My sun is in my sun is in Gemini, so could affect me. So maybe I'm just projecting. So it could make you rash. It could make you do something you hadn't thought through. So be a little careful with Mercury conjunct Antares. And I'm not trying to scare you, by the way. But Mercury conjunct Antares aside, the moon is in Libra, and the moon is making a sextile to Mercury. So moon sextile Mercury is suggesting that actually you can be quite civilized when dealing with other people. Yeah, sure, you've got the capacity for causing maybe mass destruction if you just say what's on your mind, if you're looking for trouble for the sake of it. Yeah, if you want to cause trouble with Mercury conjunct Antares, no problem. It'll be easy. I mean, maybe that's what some Geminis want to do. You'll certainly know how to get attention. But probably the right thing to do is to have a certain amount of consideration for other people's feelings and try to communicate in a way that is balanced. Let people have their say. And also with the moon conjunct the south node, because the south node is still in Libra. We'll actually be moving back into Virgo soon, but with the moon still in Libra, there's a certain tendency, Gemini, maybe to take yourself a little too seriously, to think that what you do is all that matters and not to consider what other people want to do. And so try to focus on other people's creativity if you possibly can. Try to nurture them. Try to show an interest. It might be something you don't want to do because you might be thinking all the time about your own material, your own concerns, and in a way that is, it's quite egotistical. You might do that, but that's the wrong approach. The North Node is in Aries. The North Node is asking you to actively take an interest in what other people are doing and they will really appreciate it. And don't forget that Mercury is in Sagittarius. It is in your opposite sign. So it's just important that you let other people have their say, and you just nurture them, not in an emotional way. I mean, I know nurture has a concept of being a very sort of emotional word, but it's not about that. It's almost nurturing them in terms of your interest. That's what people want, particularly now. They want you to show an interest. And if you can show an interest and be open-minded about it, I think it will be very much appreciated. And in fact, today is a day when I think that you can really get on with people if you make the effort, if you're prepared to make the effort. So I think that is really something that is worth doing. Though it's also true that you do have some serious thoughts. On the outside, you're quite capable of being easygoing, but deep down, you are kind of thinking ahead. You are thinking that there are things that need to be dealt with sooner rather than later. So it's kind of difficult to be entirely relaxed. And that might be to do with the fact that geocentrically, Mercury is starting to make a square with Saturn. Heliocentrically, we also have Mercury opposition Saturn. Of course, Mercury is your ruler, so it is hitting Saturn. So you do have serious thoughts, and you're thinking that there are certain things that have to be done, and you're not really in the mood for getting into the Christmas spirit. Maybe I'm just projecting there, but you just feel there are other priorities. And I think you're probably right, but you don't necessarily have to be completely open about these priorities. You can go with the flow. You can listen to other people. You can give the impression that you're there for them, but all the while you know what matters. And I think over the next few days, as Mercury moves closer to this geocentric square with Saturn, I think that these priorities will become increasingly pressing, but perhaps you somehow need to compartmentalize them, particularly as it's Christmas. They have a place. You can give them some of your energy, but not perhaps all of your energy. And going back to what I was saying right at the beginning, Mercury is conjunct Antares. Mercury conjunct Antares can encourage you to just put yourself first, and to perhaps be annoying and troublesome and lash out even verbally. You could do that with Mercury conjunct Antares, but I think you need to restrain yourself. And I think if you can show some self-discipline, I think the universe will be very pleased with you. Cancer. The moon is moving through Libra, and with the moon moving through Libra, I think it may be a time when you kind of want to get into the seasonal spirit. By that I mean the seasonal spirit. I mean, when we think about Christmas and a run up to Christmas, we often think about home and family, don't we? And so with the moon moving through Libra, it's kind of obvious. You didn't really need astrology to tell you that, did I, for most Cancerians? I mean, Cancerians very often have a sentimental streak. Things like Christmas can be important to you. Family is important. And so with the moon moving through Libra, which is a very sort of low profile part of your chart, can focusing on the absolute roots of who you are. With the moon moving through Libra, I think the home is going to be where you feel most comfortable and where you're going to feel most balanced. I think you could take things too far, spending too much time at home, perhaps ignoring a couple of other responsibilities. I think that is possible, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. And the moon in Libra is making a sextile to Mars and a sextile to Mercury. In fact, the moon is kind of on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. And so you can be at home, you can be somewhere where you feel secure and sheltered, and at the same time you can make things happen. Moon sextile Mars, Moon sextile Mercury. That suggests a lot of action, and the kind of action that you want to get involved in is for a reason. It's not just action for the sake of it. It's about you deciding that certain things absolutely need to be done. You go and do them. You do them very well. You do them with energy and power and enthusiasm, and it looks as if you're going to be able to cover a lot of ground very quickly. And I suppose the less distracted you are, the better. And I don't think there will be many distractions. I mean, if you insist that you do not want to be disturbed, I think by and large your opinions and your preference will be respected. Now, with that moon sextile Mars, that might have a financial orientation, because with Mars has been moving through Leo, and Mars does actually move into Cancer, your sign, pretty soon, but it's not there yet. But with Mars in early Leo, you may feel that money and financial security, these are areas that you perhaps want to put a little bit of effort into at the moment. And with Moon sextile Mars, it may be quite easy for you to sort out something financially that has been bothering you. You might have regarded it as something that was almost to be dreaded. But with Moon sextile Mars, if there's something financially that has been worrying you or needs to be resolved, I think you can deal with it pretty quickly. It may just be about doing something, or Moon sextile Mercury may be about saying something, because with Moon sextile Mercury, you're going to be very good at talking, and you're going to be able to talk about things of a fairly routine administrative nature. Okay, the subject matter might not be particularly interesting, but if it's just something that needs to be resolved, needs to be talked about, needs to be sorted out, then that is something that you can do with Moon sextile Mercury. So overall, Cancer, I think it's a fairly useful day when you don't have to be overwhelmed by the world around you. And if you want peace and quiet, then I think that you can definitely get it. Leo. So Leo, you could say that the main aspect today is a quintile between the Sun and Saturn. So the Sun and Saturn are 72 degrees apart, and Sun and Saturn are about control, discipline. I mean, that's what Saturn is about. We often see when we see Sun and Saturn, that seems a bit grim, something restricting you. That's not how I would see it, because it's a quintile. A quintile gives you an enormous amount of choice. It gives you an opportunity to work out how you want to present yourself. And with Sun quintile Saturn, you might make the decision that you want to come over as someone who is quite disciplined, in control. You might feel that you want to get your act together, and you might at the same time feel that you haven't got your act together. I mean, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but if you do feel that things are a bit chaotic, that you haven't been sufficiently organized and disciplined with this Sun quintile Saturn, I think now is a time where you really can bring things together. And it's through your conscious efforts. You have an idea of control. You have an idea about how things should be brought together, and you can do it. And in terms of how you present yourself, you can make an effort to present yourself as a very focused and organized person, and you might feel it's a bit of a fake, but it doesn't matter. You'll be able to create the right impression. And at the moment, Leo, we have the moon moving through Libra, and moon moving through Libra is it's a good place from a Leo perspective, especially as the moon is making a sextile to Mars. So you've got Mars in Leo, moon is making a sextile to Mars in Leo. So with that moon-Mars sextile, I think that you're going to be able to communicate with a considerable amount of power. And I suppose going back to that Sun quintile Saturn, it is about the impression you're giving, and you really are able to come over as being a strong person and someone who is in fact able to communicate powerfully and is able to actually be powerful. And so don't underestimate yourself. And if you want to say something, then you can say it, and you can certainly have an impact. But don't just say things for the sake of it. I mean, there is that temptation. Just putting too much energy into telling people what's on your mind, because what's on your mind now might be important to you, but it doesn't mean to say you've got all the answers, that you understand everything. There's always scope for understanding more, especially now with the moon conjunct the south node in Libra. Moon conjunct the south node in Libra might, in certain situations, Leo, be about focusing on the wrong facts. You can be very clear about the way things should be, what you want, and what you believe. But if you put too much energy into communicating what you believe, there is some danger you make a fool of yourself, perhaps because you haven't thought things through. And because we've got south node in Libra, north node in Aries, and perhaps with that north node in Aries, there's perhaps a sense in which, before getting entirely focused on the message, perhaps you need to be thinking about the content of the message, and perhaps the content of the message needs to be updated. And so you thought you understood the world. You perhaps are going back to conclusions you made months, if not years ago, but revisit the conclusions you've made, revisit some of your opinions, and have another look at the facts. And you might realize that, something has changed. But, overall, Leo, the moon is not just making a sextile to Mars, it is making a sextile to Mercury. But with that moon sextile Mercury, you're able to talk to people very well, talk to people effectively. Perhaps you shouldn't be trying too hard to push any particular message, and it may be enough to just talk. What is it you've got to say? It doesn't matter. The point is that there is a conversation taking place, and I think it is actually a great time to be starting conversations. And to begin with, those conversations might be entirely empty, and that's especially the case if you're talking to people you don't really know, but you just want to make their acquaintance. To begin with, there is nothing to say, so you don't have to make an effort. Just say what's on your mind, but keep your opinions for a later date. And in that way, I think you can have a good Monday. Virgo, when I was talking to Gemini, I mentioned the fact that the Mercury is conjunct Antares. And Antares can be a difficult fixed star. And of course, Mercury is your ruler. So with Mercury conjunct Antares, there's some danger that you might be trouble. Because Mercury conjunct Antares, it's very clever. You're very clever. But it might be too clever by half. And you might kind of insist that you're in the right, and you might just have too many things to say, and you actually find that the reason you are talking is not because you're trying to get closer to anyone, but because you're trying, at least at perhaps an unconscious level, to cause trouble. Now, I do have to be careful here. I was just looking at I was looking at the comments, by the way, and someone commented they're a Virgo. They said they're not going to listen to my forecast anymore for Virgo because I'm too negative. I don't know. Am I being too negative for Virgos? I think this has happened before. I don't know. I mean, I don't have an issue with Virgos, not really, but still, I do read the comments. And talking about Mercury conjunct Antares, I'm just pointing something out. Mercury is conjunct Antares. It can make you troublesome. It doesn't mean you are going to be troublesome, but Antares is a somewhat difficult fixed star. And yeah, you can be too clever by half. You think you know all the answers, and you therefore feel that you need to express this. And by expressing this, you can cause trouble. And, heliocentrically, we have got Mercury opposition Saturn. And so it may be that certain things are bothering you, troubling you, and you feel that you have to resolve the matter, and the words may not come out quite in the way you expected them to, and that may be where the trouble lies. But this is just a possibility. It's not certain, and there are other things going on. Mercury is not in a terrible position. The Moon is making a sextile to Mercury. Moon sextile Mercury is a fortunate aspect. It certainly emphasizes the fact that you've got things to say. The question is, what are you going to talk about? Do you have to talk about anything specific? What you must not do in terms of what you talk about is express your frustrations, and particularly in a sort of a raw, emotional kind of way. It's not a day for emotion, not really. Saturn's in Pisces, Neptune's in Pisces, but it's in general it's not a particularly emotional day, and so with moon sextile Mercury, try to be free flowing. Mercury is in a fire sign. You don't want to get stuck on any one thing, and maybe that's the key point. You don't want to get obsessed. There might be one thing that bothers you, and you just want to put all your energy into it. That's not the way it should be. And the Moon is in Libra. The Moon in Libra is about balance. So everything you say should be about creating balance. Perhaps telling people things they might want to hear. Doesn't mean to say that you have to do things other people's way. I mean, you do have to think about your own interests. I mean, that this Moon sextile Mercury could have a financial dimension, and Moon is in Libra, and it may be that there are certain things you want to discuss that are of a financial nature, and that's fine, but provided it's not emotional, provided you're not worked up about it, because once you get worked up about something, things are just not going to go right. On the other hand, if you take a relaxed approach, I think that it will be appreciated. And if you try hard enough, Virgo, I think you'll know how to make people happy. You'll know how to get people to like you without having to compromise anything. So perhaps try to be a little more relaxed, Virgo. And in terms of serious things, yeah, I know there are serious things you're thinking about. Mercury is going to make a square to Saturn soon, over the next few days. Mercury is at 10 degrees Sagittarius. It's moving to a square of Saturn at 13, 14 Pisces. So with Mercury making a square to Saturn, there are things that need your attention, absolutely. But in the first instance, you don't necessarily have to advertise the fact. Even if you know that another person is doing something wrong, even if you're absolutely sure about it, you don't have to tell them. You don't have to bring a matter up. At least today you don't have to bring a matter up. In the end, you might have to. But, I suppose it's a run up to Christmas, and things can get tense. And as I've suggested on several occasions in this video, I'm not convinced that Christmas Day is going to be overall a great day. I don't think it's... I suppose astrology isn't everything, but there are problems around the Christmas period, and you perhaps don't want to make it worse by picking fights with people or choosing, this is the time you want to bring something out into the open, when maybe it can be left until later. Libra, we have got the moon moving into your sign, and this is a time when you feel a certain sense of harmony and balance. That's what Libra is all about: harmony and balance. And with moon moving into Libra, I think you just get it, and you can just relax to an extent. Though the moon is making a conjunction to the South Node, and I suppose with that moon conjunct the South Node, we could say that you don't necessarily want to get too comfortable, because if you've got South Node in Libra, if you try too hard to be balanced, if you try too hard to fit in with what other people want, you may be losing something. This is perhaps not what you're supposed to be doing. You've got to think about yourself, and in order to think about yourself, you might actually have to think about other people. Now that might sound like a contradiction, but if you want to look after your own interests, you have to keenly understand what other people are thinking and doing, what they're thinking, what motivates them. You've kind of got to be a little bit of an amateur psychologist here if you want to think about yourself, because you need to understand what other people are doing, and you need to take a keen interest in other people. And once you understand other people and you really have a good understanding of their motivations, then you'll have a greater sense of your own limitations and your own power and what you can do and what you can't do, and it's just going to be easier to operate. But this moon in Libra is certainly fortunate. It's making a sextile to Mars. It's also making a sextile to Mercury. So moon sextile Mars, moon sextile Mercury, I think that you're in a position where you can be very clear about what you want and what you don't want. And I think in most cases you're going to be able to talk to pretty much everyone. You'll know what to say, you'll know how to say it, and I think that you'll be pretty spontaneous. And I think that in most cases people are going to really appreciate you, and I think they could also appreciate the kind of vision that you want to present. And I suppose to an extent that depends how idealistic you are, but many Librans are in a position where they can actually bring people together, and you can almost be the center of something. Something that maybe is important to you, or just maybe the center of social activity. And at some level, perhaps the world is feeling a little bit disturbed, a little bit sorry for itself, and you might be the kind of the antidote, and you can perhaps bring people together around an idea or even a cause. That is possible. Many Librans are quite interested in politics. So if you've got, I don't know, it's perhaps actually quite a good time for political activity. I know most Librans are not going to want to get involved in political activity, but if that kind of interests you, then that might be something to think about. But you certainly represent something that many people want to be part of, and if you have a vision, an idea, then quite possibly, Libra, you can have a fortunate impact on your community. And as far as relationships are concerned, Moon is sextile Mars, Moon is sextile Mercury. I think that you can take action to not just bring people together, but bring people together and bring yourself together, perhaps with another person. Relationships today, I think, should work pretty well. And I think part of it is that you'll know what to say and you'll know how to respond. And if anyone has their doubts, some people will have their doubts today. Some people might be a bit reticent, but I think there is something about you that's quite reassuring. And so even if someone has their doubts, if you say the right thing, then you can perhaps reassure them, and they might do things your way after all. Scorpio, you might feel today that you kind of want to be left alone. That might feel best. What is there to do? It's the run up to Christmas. Things are slowing down, and at the same time, recently it might have been all a bit too much, and so being a Scorpio, you perhaps feel that you're ready to make your exit, and you'll be very nice about it. I don't think you're going to be especially dramatic about it, but you just feel that that is the right thing to do, that it feels most comfortable. But just because something feels comfortable doesn't mean that you should necessarily go and do it. It may be the case that if you were to withdraw from something, you feel you've had enough, you've done enough, you've done your bit, and you just want to do something else. You may be doing something a little too early, and if you act too early, you may be allowing something to disintegrate. Maybe you're working on something and you've almost got it together and it's working well, and then you stop at the last moment. You stop before something is just finished. And in doing that, you could go backwards. You could wreck a lot of your hard work. So, Scorpio, maybe something needs to be finished off and you don't want to finish it off. And this might also connect to the fact that it is a last quarter moon. So we've got new moon December the 30th, December the 31st. And so as we move to the end of the lunar cycle, it's perhaps about you feeling that something is complete. But the lunar cycle has got another week to run. It's sort of over a week to run, almost, I think. So what is it? What is it that you want to finish that is not finished? So try to make sure that you see it through. And it won't be as hard a work as you think it is. It's just doing something maybe in quite a sort of low profile kind of way. You make sure it's all finished, and then you're free. Then you get your freedom. Then you can do what you want. And of course, at some stage, the moon will move into Scorpio. And I think moon in Scorpio, the most signs is not great, but I think for moon going to Scorpio for you is going to be good. But moon is not in Scorpio today. It's in Libra. It's in a sign before Scorpio. And there are a couple of aspects of note today, and one aspect that you can't ignore is the fact that the moon is sextile Mars, and moon sextile Mars is about, like what I said, you may be being able to work behind the scenes, and you can do stuff that's very useful behind the scenes. And if you have a job or you have a business, certainly things that need to be done today, or certainly things that can be done today with that moon sextile Mars. And the key thing is, it's about not advertising yourself. You don't have to do that, but you can just get on with it. And in the process, I think you will feel a certain sense of satisfaction. And then the moon makes a sextile to Mercury. Now, that sextile to Mercury could also be fairly materialistic. I mean, in a good way. Your moon sextile Mercury just may be that something you need to look at. It could have financial relevance, and doing things with money and no one else knows what you're doing in that secretive Scorpio way, might be a good thing to do. And so it's something that no one needs to know about, and you just do it, and it's done, and actually you feel good about it. And so Scorpio, I think the main message is today: don't give in to your first impulse. Your first impulse, I think today, is to withdraw. You've kind of had enough. But I think if you leave the scene, you're going to be leaving the scene too early. I think there are still things that need to be done. And if you don't do them, then you might find that something that was really close to completion has to be started again. And that's not something that you want to happen. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, it's supposed to be a time of year which is pretty sociable, and the moon is in Libra. And so with the moon in Libra, I think that it's a time when you can very much enjoy other people's company. You're going to have quite a lot to say for yourself, and at the same time you can just be relaxed, and you can I suppose follow the crowd if you'd like to follow the crowd. And that's a natural impulse, and it just feels fine, especially as the moon in Libra is sextile Mars and it's sextile Mercury, so it just feels there's a lot of action going on. And moon sextile Mercury can be very good in terms of relationships, because Mercury is ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. Mercury is in Sagittarius, it's in your sign. Moon is sextile Mercury, so it does seem that there's at least one person who thinks you're great, and that might represent someone you already know, someone who's perhaps been with you for a long time, in which case existing relationships can prosper. At the same time, it's possible that it might represent a new relationship, someone new coming into your life with moon sextile Mercury. And so the social dimension looks promising, but I don't think that you want to go completely overboard on the social dimension. The South Node is in Libra, so when the moon moves into Libra, it makes a conjunction with the South Node, and the South Node represents the past. Now, it may be, in terms of your social activities, you are revisiting the past. It could even be a last hurrah. I mean, I suppose Christmas is a time of looking backwards in many respects, and I suppose people are always trying to recreate the past. Of course, with global warming, white Christmases are not going to be so common. I think I was reading about some report in Germany that you associate German Christmases with snow and Yeah, white Christmases in Germany, but there's a report in Germany there aren't going to be any more white Christmases anymore. The snow is going because of climate change, and so if you're trying to think about the past, trying to recreate the past, well, good luck. um, and so it might not be entirely helpful to think that you can be too nostalgic. You try to be nostalgic, but you're always disappointed because the past is never going to happen. It's not going to happen again. The future might be not quite so comfortable. And the North Node, of course, is in Aries. And so the North Node in Aries is perhaps reminding you that this is kind of what you should be doing. You should be thinking about yourself. Now, the North Node is not going to be in Aries forever. The North Node is, well, it's now at 2 degrees 6 Aries. It's, when does actually, so this is my ephemeris looking at the mean node actually goes into Pisces on the 30th of January. So we've only got around a month left of the North Node being in Aries. And so while the North Node is in Aries, for this last month, it is a time when you need to be thinking about yourself. Yourself is more important than other people. It's more important than your friends. Your friends, very nice, but it's not a pressure that you should give into. Moon conjunct South Node in Libra, which we've got today. There's going to be one more conjunction between the Moon and South Node in Libra. After that, you're going to have to wait nearly 20 years before the next time that happens. So this is a time to be thinking about what you can do and what you can do that makes you stand out. And I suppose if you're worrying about other people and what they can do, what they want to do, and if you're obsessed about it, you're missing something. You're almost sort of missing your destiny. And I suppose I should point out that the Sun is aspecting the nodal axis. So you've got the Sun in Capricorn square the North Node, square the South Node. Perhaps Sagittarius, you need to just have a moment where you need to just get a bit real with that Sun conjunct South Node in terms of what you should be doing. I know that we shouldn't be thinking too much about power and money and material things, but it may be when you actually think about the material dimension and your material needs, as well as your security, it may then occur to you that if you spend too much time on other people, you're messing yourself up, and you need to think about your own interests. And right now, I think that is an okay thing. So at the beginning of this piece, I did say that socially things are working well for you, things are running smoothly, and they are. Do enjoy your social life today and tomorrow. But just remember, it's not the only thing, and it's most importantly, it's not what matters. What matters is you. And in many respects, you and your friends and associates, you have different priorities. And I mean those priorities not just in terms of day-to-day priorities, but priorities of a sort of spiritual nature that are related to your overall destiny. Capricorn, you might feel a certain sense of obligation, that you can't just do nothing. Things need to happen. And we've got the moon in Libra. It's a last quarter moon. And so last quarter moon, remember the new moon is right at the end of the year, December the 30th, December the 31st. And so with this last quarter moon, there's perhaps a certain sense of urgency. The lunar cycle is about to end. The last lunar cycle of the year is about to end. It's got a week left. And the last quarter represents the moment where you have a last chance to get things together. Perhaps things you started at the beginning of a month, now you have to act quickly. At least that might be how it feels. And so many Capricorns today are not going to be too bothered by the fact that it's just 2 days to Christmas. In fact, the fact that it's 2 days to Christmas perhaps increases the urgency, that there's something you want to do that is not necessarily connected with the festivities, not necessarily connected with your home and family. You just feel that you do need to do it. And okay, it's not something you can give all your time to. I mean, you are needed elsewhere, but with the moon making a sextile to Mercury and moon making a sextile to Mars, there is an indication here that you can get things done quickly, and you'll just have a very good idea of what approach you need to adopt, and your prompt actions can, I think, be very effective. And I think that in terms of dealing with other people, you're going to be quick. You understand that other people have their needs. Other people have to be dealt with in a particular way. You also understand that other people can be an obstacle. And so it might actually be a day of diplomacy, where you have to convince people of things quickly, because there's a bit of a hurry, but you don't want to give the impression that you're in a hurry. And by being very active socially and being very aware of other people's psychology and other people's limits, you can sort of negotiate the situation and in the end get to where you want to be. And that would certainly give you a great sense of relief and a feeling that it's job almost done. It's always going to be almost done. I mean, the lunar cycle is not quite finished, but I think today and tomorrow, while the moon goes through Libra, I think that you are going to be, I think, quite ambitious, and you're not really going to want to allow things to get in your way. But it might also be that subtlety is important. If you were to be completely honest about what you wanted, what your desires, what your goals are, you might not get much support. So perhaps you need to keep your motivations to yourself, because in that way it won't arouse suspicion. People might regard you as being somehow weird, at the very least, if you were honest about what you wanted. So just focus on the actions, moving from step A to step B to step C, and you keep doing that, and you arrive at where you need to get to, and then you can start focusing on other pressures. And of course, other pressures, home and family, that is a real pressure. North Node is in Aries. North Node has been in Aries for some time, and North Node in Aries in a Capricorn chart means that in a broader sense, it is a time when Capricorns need to be creating home and stability for themselves. And perhaps, I don't know, if their house or apartment is a complete mess, you might feel you haven't got much time to sort it out. That might be how North Node in Aries works out, especially as the North Node is going to be in Aries only for another month, not much more than that. I mean, the mean, I haven't checked True Node, but the mean North Node goes into Pisces at the end of January. So that might be encouraging a little bit of hurry for you, and then the North Node will go into then North Node in Pisces represents something very different. So Capricorn, there are different demands, and I think You can put your own interests first, provided you don't take it too far. Aquarius. Aquarius, you could say that the main aspect today is a quintile between the Sun and Saturn. So, there is the Sun at 2 degrees Capricorn, Saturn at 13 degrees Pisces, and this Sun Saturn quintile is relevant to you because Saturn is your ruler, and Sun rules your opposite sign of Leo. So the Sun Saturn quintile may say something about relationships. And so how would this work? So Sun quintile Saturn, the quintile is about what you are trying to create. I mean, you have a vision about the way things should be. That can be part of the quintile and what that means. And so you have a vision, and then you have this question of how do you put it into practice? How do you put it into action? So in terms of relationships and how you get on with people, you might have a vision of what kind of relationship you want to be in. So if you're not in a relationship, you're thinking about what kind of relationship you'd like to be in. If you're in a relationship and the relationship is not perfect, I suppose most relationships are not perfect, but you still have an idea how you'd like this relationship to be. And so with this vision, it starts off as a vision, I mean, almost a fantasy. But the challenge of a quintile is to make it real. And so it starts at a completely abstract theoretical level, the quintile, but then it sort of moves through, and in the end you try to turn it into reality. Now the question is, can you turn it into reality? I can't give any guarantees, but with Sun quintile Saturn you have a good chance. And it may be that you can go through the motions to begin with. You perhaps start behaving towards someone in a way that is quite forced, but just because it's forced doesn't mean it's wrong. And you try to behave perhaps as you'd like them to behave towards you. And it's just possible with the Sun quintile Saturn that you create something. You start off as doing something that is very unreal, and it just seems something that has been just created, and it can't last because it's not natural. But it may be that what you're doing is you're providing a kickstart, and you may actually get what you want. So if you're in a relationship and you're not comfortable with it, you're not happy with it, things aren't working to plan, and it's not the kind of relationship that is going anywhere. I mean, it's not going anywhere. I mean, it's not going to disappear anytime soon, but it might feel a bit stagnant. This Sun quintile Saturn does allow you to consciously make an effort to change it. Are you going to be successful? I think you can, provided you're really very focused. I mean, normally one would say that it's quite impossible almost to change relationships. Just with Sun quintile Saturn, maybe it is actually possible. And aside from that, the moon is moving through Libra, and Libra is, obviously it's an air sign, and it moves through Libra. It moves through Libra tomorrow as well. So with the moon moving through Libra, there is a sense of optimism, a belief that not just that things can be better, but perhaps something new is on the horizon, something completely new. And I think that's kind of something you want at the moment, and you feel that it's very important. And I think the moon, I think it can happen. The moon is sextile Mercury, it's sextile Mars, and so I think you might also get a fair amount of support from other people. Moon sextile Mars. Mars is in Leo, your opposite sign. Moon also sextile Mercury. Mercury is in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a sign that's very sociable, especially from an Aquarian perspective. And so, with the Moon making those two sextiles, I think that there are things happening. I think there are things happening that you enjoy, but don't be gullible. I mean, I know it's okay to have fantasies and to believe that things are possible, but don't necessarily believe what you're told. Don't believe that something is possible just because you're told it's possible. I think that you do have to think for yourself, especially as the Moon is conjunct the South Node. Because Moon conjunct the South Node might be about getting caught up with a belief system, which is all very well, all very nice, but there are certain details that just have not been addressed. And belief system, it could be a political belief system, it could be a religious belief system, something spiritual, whatever it is, there's something missing. That's something that has not been properly clarified. And maybe that's your job. Now, I'm not saying that you have to just give up on something. And, I still think that the Moon sextile Mercury, Moon sextile Mars can be great, can be enjoyable. You're presented with a new view of the world. But whatever that view of the world is, it has to be questioned. Doesn't mean you have to destroy it for your questions, but you have to just make sure that certain key details are addressed. But maybe these are subtleties. I think that in a broad sense, the moon is in Libra. It's making a sextile making a trine to Jupiter. So with that Moon trine Jupiter in air signs, I think there's just a sense today that things are moving, but at the same time things aren't too seriously. You don't have to worry about complicated emotions. I think that your ideas can go in many different directions, and I think it can be a pretty enjoyable day. Pisces, you might feel that things are not as good as they should be in some ways, at least to begin with. And that might be because you are just overcomplicating them. You see something and you ask yourself questions about it. You really want to get into something deeply. I think that might be a feature of today, wanting to go deep into something. And maybe you can go too deeply into something, and you can perhaps ask too many questions. And if you ask too many questions, you feel increasingly confused, and matters may not actually be helped by other people. Other people it might feel as if they're keeping something secret, they're holding something back from you, and you're having to do a lot of guessing. And that's not really what you want to do. I mean, what you're looking for is clarity, and maybe you have to have the courage to demand clarity. And the Moon in Libra does make a sextile to Mercury, and it makes a sextile to Mars. And so at a certain point, you may decide that things are confusing enough and you need some answers, and you don't feel like asking for answers. You just want to keep quiet. Well, if you just ask, it might be painful. You might be worried that the reaction is not going to be right, and that you might cause offense. But if you just ask, you'll be surprised. I think that you'll get a really rapid response, and I think that when you see the answers for what they really are, you'll start to appreciate that things are actually not as bad as they looked on. when I was going to say not as bad as they looked on the surface. Well, in a way, it's not as bad as they looked deep down. When you go deep down into something, something looks terrible. But that's not necessarily the right place to be looking at it. Maybe you should be focusing on the surface, keeping it simple. And if you keep it simple, then things are simple. So that might be the right approach. And with Moon sextile Mercury, it's important to give people a chance, and give people a chance to give you their views. And it's not going to be anything like as difficult as you'd imagine to get people to talk and to get people to open up. And you're a Pisces, you're sensitive, you know what to say, and you'll say it right, I think. But you've got to start the process going. And you shouldn't feel that anything is running away from you. If you don't like the way things are going, you can apply the brakes, you can get attention, you can make some noise. People will listen to you, but people need to know you're there. And I think today you very much can make it clear to them that you are there. And if you have ideas about the way you'd like your world to be constructed, don't give up on those ideas, because the sun is making a quintile to Saturn. Saturn is in Pisces. Saturn is in your sign. It's still in your sign, and so with Sun quintile Saturn, that gives you an opportunity to make things happen your way. And that's especially the case if you happen to be socializing, or if you're going to parties, get-togethers, whatever, you mixing with people. There's no need for you not to be in control. You can be in full control, and things can work out exactly as you had imagined. So your power might not be obvious today, Pisces, but I think it's very much in existence. And now I want to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was innocence. I mean, that's a nice hexagram, innocence. I think we've had it not so long ago. And innocence is about having no expectations. We're at the beginning of something. We don't really know what we're doing. We have no idea how things are going to work out. And that does give us innocence. It does make us quite naive. I think we are quite naive because we just simply don't know what's going to happen. And we have an open mind. And it's good to have an open mind. And the first line moves. And with the first line moving, it suggests overall that we start off in a good position. We are embarking on something and we don't know entirely what we're doing. And we don't have the experience, we don't have the knowledge, but we're open. We don't have any preconceived notions about how it might turn out. And that's what the universe wants to hear. It likes that attitude. And so that means that we make a lot of progress because we have no expectations. We don't know what we're doing. It may even be beginner's luck. That's often the case, isn't it? And so we make progress, but we don't make too much progress. We make as much progress as we can. And then we naturally reach a limit. We realize that, okay, this is it. We've gone as far as we can, and that's the way it is. And we stop, and that's fine. Now, bottom line moves, that means that we move to a different hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram 12, which is standstill. Now, that doesn't sound great, does it? Standstill. Standstill is not a good hexagram. But maybe that's just telling us what we already knew. It's telling us that, we try something, we perhaps experiment with something, we don't really know what we're doing, and we go as far as we can, and we reach a point where we realize we cannot go any further. Yes, we reach a point of standstill, but I don't think that this hexagram standstill is quite as bad as it looks, because if you look at standstill in the I Ching, it talks about evil, and heaven and earth are separated. It's just a very serious hexagram, but I wouldn't have treated it so seriously. There is a view of the I Ching that you don't even need to look at the second hexagram if you've got one line moving, that you just need to look at the first line moving, and the first line is just telling us we go as far as we can, we reach a natural standstill, and that's perhaps how we should see it. So take things as far as you can today. Even if you don't fully know what you're doing. Of course, if you're doing anything dangerous, then you should not do anything at all. But all things being equal, provided you're not doing anything dangerous, take things as far as you can, and there will be a natural limit. And when you hit that limit, you can stop. You've gone as far as you can, and then, I don't know, maybe you're going to have to get some help, or you're going to have to work out what needs to be done, and maybe tomorrow things will be easier, but one step at a time. And I think that's perhaps how we need to see it. And now it's time to consider the Federal Reserve. I mean, it might seem a very boring topic, the Federal Reserve, but it is the Federal Reserve's birthday today. Federal Reserve was signed into being, I believe, at 6 p.m. on December the 23rd, 2020. 6 p.m. December the 23rd, 1913 is when the Federal Reserve came into being. So that means that we have a chart for the Federal Reserve. So looking at the Federal Reserve's chart, here it is. For some reason, this is 6:02 p.m. And so, not surprisingly, it's a Capricorn. I mean, that's not surprising, given this is a central bank, which has an absolutely critical role in terms of the American economy, and now the global economy. I mean, in 1913, the United States was not as powerful as it was now, and so perhaps in 1913 it was more about the US economy, but now the decisions of the Federal Reserve regarding sort of interest rates and monetary policy have an absolutely massive impact, and they affect people's lives directly. So, if you see that your stock market portfolio collapses overnight, it could well be because of something that the chair of the Federal Reserve has said. And so here's the chart. I think the chart is possibly quite descriptive. And so Mars in Cancer rising. This is a body that takes itself very seriously. It's very dynamic, and it likes to get its way, and it's very aware of its power. Furthermore, the Sun it's got Sun opposition Pluto. What more can be said? Pluto is a planet of power. Pluto was 0 degrees, 5 degrees Cancer, just crossing just on the Aries point. Now, we can look at that Pluto on the Aries point in other ways. Pluto, it's Cancer. Pluto going into Cancer is the nation. It's about, Pluto. This was just before the First World War. People across the world dying for their countries. Dulciet decorum est pro patria mori. How sweet and honourable it is to die for one's country. And that's Pluto in Cancer. But Pluto in Cancer holds on. Its country, its power, its brief, and that's the Federal Reserve. And Sun opposition Pluto, it is desperate to stay in power, to be in power, to be in control. And when you have a body like this, which lasts beyond a normal human lifetime, because it's now 111 years old, very often it gets stronger. The aspects in the chart, I think, get stronger as time goes on. And so Sun opposition Pluto, increasingly this power-obsessed organization, Sun opposition Pluto. And if that time is right, that Sun opposition Pluto is square the midheaven. And so that's very much what this organization is about. And look at the moon. Moon is at 14 Scorpio. Moon in Scorpio. Again, moon in Scorpio, moon in the Via Combusta in Scorpio. So moon in the Via Combusta, yeah, that's what the Fed is all about. It's all about having to deal with kind of one crisis after another. Everything is very dramatic with the Fed. And the Fed loses control a bit, then it has to assert its control, and it's just one drama after another. And I think that's how the Fed is becoming, and it's just got stronger and stronger and stronger as time goes on. And I'm sure the Fed is much stronger now, much more influential now than it was in 1913. So I do think that we have a chart that very much works. Notice that Mars conjunct Neptune. Does it always know what it's doing? Now, people on the right, there are many people on the libertarian right who believe a Federal Reserve shouldn't exist, that the Federal Reserve is keeping people back, keeping the economy back. But perhaps you should just allow the business cycle to unfold in its natural way. Boom and bust is just a natural way, but we seem to have forgotten boom and bust because the Fed has just tried to keep things afloat as long as it can, doesn't want to have huge crashes. And that is part of the function of the Fed. But does it always know what it's doing with that Mars conjunct Neptune? So the question might be, does this chart work? So if this chart were to work, you would have expected big economic events to show up for the Fed. So, I don't know, the biggest event that we all think about is the Wall Street crash, which, so October the 29th, this is sort of Black Tuesday, but there was a Black Monday. There are all sorts of dark days leading up to the stock market crash in 1929, and of course this led to the Great Recession, the depression that dominated the 30s, and in fact the stock market kept going down until 1933, and I don't think it actually recovered its value until 1954. I don't know whether that includes dividends, but it was a major event, and of course the Fed tried to intervene, and the Fed did intervene at the end of October 1929. I don't know what they did. I think they reduced requirements on banks or something. I'm not an economist, but they did do something, and so that might be something to look at. I don't have this is just a noon chart. Don't worry about the angles here, by the way, and so. What was going on for the Fed what was going on for the Fed at the time of the crash? Did it in any way impact the Fed? Well, at the time of the crash, Pluto was at 1937 Cancer, and the Fed's Mars is at 1933 Cancer. So Pluto was actually exactly conjunct the Federal Reserve's Mars at the time of the 1929 crash. It was also right on the Fed's ascendant. And so this might have been the first time where the Fed was really able to tune into its own power and what it could do. And look at Mercury. Mercury was at 1902 Libra, so Mercury was square Pluto. And it was it was square Pluto, square the ascendant. It was square Pluto in the sky, and Mercury was hitting the Fed's Mars and the Fed's ascendant. So, just on the basis of the Wall Street crash, I think that there is some evidence that this chart works. And in terms of people running the Fed, I mean, I think if you want to be a chairman of a Fed, it's quite useful if you have good connections with the chart of a Fed. And I think many people regard one of the most successful chairs of the Federal Reserve to have been Paul Volcker. So Paul Volcker was the Fed chair who was tasked with trying to deal with the inflation of the 1970s, and Paul Volcker had this meeting on October the 6th, 1979, which was a Saturday, and it was called the Saturday Night Special. And here is a chart for the Saturday Night Special, when they made this press conference, which I think they said that they were going to start a process of massively increasing interest rates. And interest rates would just be racked up. And this is what happened. I think they peaked at around 20-something%. And you imagine that 20% interest rates, that's what they were. And it caused a recession. It completely crashed the economy. But at the same time, it sorted out inflation. You can always deal with inflation. I suppose if you're prepared to crash the economy, it can be done. And looking at the chart of the Saturday Night Special, you had Saturn square Neptune. And so that might be it. Perhaps Neptune in Sagittarius might represent rampant inflation and in Sagittarius, but Saturn is square Neptune, and so Saturn in Virgo square Neptune, and that kind of brought the whole thing under control. Don't worry, I'll be looking at Paul Volcker's chart in a moment. So this, in a way, is one of the most dramatic interventions by the Fed, and in particular by the Fed chair Paul Volcker. And so looking at the chart comparison between there's the Federal Reserve in the middle, that's its chart in a wheel, and then you've got the outer wheel. This is the exact timing of the Saturday Night Special with that press conference. And I suppose you can look at Uranus. Uranus was at 19.2 Scorpio, so Uranus was just past the trine to the Fed's ascendant, applying to a trine of the Fed's Mars. And so that Uranus applying to the Fed's Mars, this was the time when the Fed started to rack up interest rates. And, it was not easy. And I suppose that Uranus was kind of making a semi-sextile to the Fed's Venus. I suppose Venus is about people's comfort and the economy and money, that it was very much a Uranus event. And look at Pluto. Remember how Pluto was on the Fed's ascendant at the time of the Wall Street crash in 1929. Pluto had moved on, and Pluto was conjunct the Fed's Mars at the time of the Wall Street crash in 1929. At the time of the Saturday Night Special, Pluto was at 1854 Libra. So Pluto was squaring the Fed's ascendant, squaring the Fed's Mars. Pluto was on the Mars ascendant midpoint. So I think we have some evidence here that the Fed's chart actually works, just looking at these two big events. Now, the chairman of the Fed at the time of the Saturday Night Special was Paul Volcker, and Paul Volcker is widely regarded as being an effective chairman of the Federal Reserve. And here's his chart, and he's a Virgo. I mean, I suppose if you want to be Fed chair, having 4 planets in Virgo might be quite a good thing to have. Very much focusing on the details. We've got to deal with reality. Inflation is a problem, and that's just the way it is, and just being very dynamic about it. And he's got Jupiter at 0 degrees Aries, Jupiter conjunct Uranus at 0 degrees Aries. That's someone who is prepared to take dramatic action, and so I think that his chart seems to sort of work quite well. Obviously, a lot of people must have hated him. Moon in Sagittarius, square Mars. Someone who, was quite dynamic and wasn't afraid of causing an argument. But the Moon conjunct South Node, I mean, I don't really know much about anything about Paul Volcker, but he did have Moon conjunct the South Node. So that's Paul Volcker's chart. And Paul Volcker, so it'd be interesting to look at how Paul Volcker relates to the Federal Reserve. So inner wheel, we've got the Federal Reserve, and outer wheel, we've got Paul Volcker's chart. And so Paul Volcker has a conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus. And assuming that time of 6:02 p.m. for the Federal Reserve is correct, that means that the Federal Reserve has a midheaven of 0 degrees 22 Aries. So that is how the Federal Reserve presents itself in a sort of a public setting, how it's perceived. And Paul Volcker's Jupiter is exactly on the Federal Reserve's midheaven, and also his Uranus is on the Federal Reserve's midheaven as well. So he's got this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction on the Fed's midheaven. So I'm guessing that Paul Volcker did a huge amount for the Federal Reserve's reputation. Perhaps in retrospect, I'm sure when people were losing their jobs and their businesses, at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 1980s, they were not too happy about the Federal Reserve. But I suppose now people in retrospect regard that interest rate hike as being necessary. Of course, nowadays that interest rate hike would have been impossible, because the United States has so much debt that if they put up interest rates to 20%, the country would be bankrupt, because it would not be. Now, I think the debt was, I don't know, it was a couple of trillion or something in 1979. It's now, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 32 trillion or something. The United States would not be able to pay 20% on its debt anymore. So that's kind of not viable. And of course, that is always a problem with economics, isn't it? How much can interest rates be put up? Because it's not just hurting ordinary people; it's increasing the cost of borrowing for the government. So his Jupiter on the midheaven, that's further evidence that I think we can really use this chart, and it is a good chart. And over the next year, I will certainly be looking at this chart. Now, the current chair of the Federal Reserve, I don't have a time of birth for him, is Jerome Powell. Now, I do not have a time of birth. So let me just remove the ascendant and the midheaven. I don't want to create the fantasy, but I do have an ascendant and the midheaven for him, because I don't. So here is Jerome Powell's chart. Now, he's not an economist. I think he's a lawyer, a banker. He's not an economist. And I take the view that he's a weak chair of the Federal Reserve. Now, some argue that the chair of the Federal Reserve, doesn't have too much power. That we shouldn't be focusing on the personality of the chairman of the Federal Reserve, but by virtue of being chair and having all the patronage that goes along with it, I think the chair of the Federal Reserve is important. Plus, there's a symbolic role of there's a symbolic position of the Federal Reserve, and I do think the chart of the chair of the Federal Reserve is important. Now, I just get the impression that Jerome Powell is a weak chair of the Federal Reserve. I kind of put her in the same category as Ursula von der Leyen. it's all smoke and mirrors. I don't know. I know they're completely different, but somehow I always associate those two: Ursula von der Leyen and Jerome Powell. Ursula von der Leyen, what's she? Chair of the European Commission. But he is very responsive. He's reactive. He says he responds to data. He goes this way, that way, and I think at the same time, I think Jerome Powell kind of wants to be Paul Volcker. Maybe every chair wants to be Paul Volcker. He's trying to be really tough and whatever, like Paul Volcker was. But I don't think he quite carries it off. But Jerome Powell, he is a super Aquarius, kind of. Well, no, not really. He's got sun. He's very airy. He's got Sun and Mercury in Aquarius. He's got Moon in Libra. He's got Moon Neptune. We don't know exactly where his Moon is because it's a noon chart, but he's got Moon conjunct Neptune. And, one wonders whether he really always knows what he's doing because he just responds. And I can understand that he's quite charismatic because he's got a Venus-Mars conjunction. Maybe that Venus-Mars conjunction allowed him to be over-promoted. He's got the Aries point on the Venus-Mars midpoint. So you can see Aries, Venus-Mars. So that's kind of nice, isn't it? Being charismatic. He gets promoted to things. But perhaps one problem that Jerome Powell has is that he has is Neptune. Does he really know what's going on? I mean, Neptune is moving over his Mars. We don't know exactly where his Mars is, but one way or another, Neptune is has been moving across his Mars, and it will, as soon as Neptune goes into Aries, it will cross his Venus, and so, and also he has the Moon Neptune conjunction in Libra. So I think there's a certain sort of Neptunian feel to what's happening to Jerome Powell at the moment, and we know that he wants to be tough, and he wants to be like Paul Volcker, I think, but the situation is different. But I don't think that he's an effective Fed chair. And we've got this transit coming up here, and Neptune on his Mars, and so what will happen is next year we know that Saturn and Neptune are moving into Aries, so he's going to have Neptune on. He's got Neptune on because we don't know exactly where his Mars is. Neptune is definitely on his Mars right now, one way or another. Then Saturn is moving later and later into Pisces, and so by April, May, he's going to have Saturn on his Mars, and then Saturn is going to keep going forward, and then Saturn goes retrograde in July at 156 Aries. And in fact, July is fun because we've got Saturn going retrograde at 156 Aries. We've got Neptune going retrograde at 211 Aries. So we've got a Saturn-Neptune conjunction pretty close right on his Venus in July, and I think that's going to be difficult. I wonder how long Jerome Powell is going to be able to last as Fed chair. I mean, I don't know what kind of pressure Donald is going to put on him. I know Donald wants interest rates to be reduced as much as possible. I think Donald is not into a strong dollar, and so if we look at Jerome Powell's solar arc directions, again, these are not exact because I don't have his time of birth, but comparing so we've got Jerome Powell's chart in the middle, we've got Jerome Powell's solar arc directions on the outer wheel. Look at Saturn, look at his progressed sun. His progressed sun is at 27 degrees Aries. So progressed sun is about to hit his Saturn. Now, that, to my mind, seems to be potentially quite difficult. And look at progress Uranus. Progress Uranus, this is solar arc directions, not secondaries, by the way. His secondary Uranus is now at 27 Virgo, opposition his Mars. So that's coming up. So having solar arc Sun opposition his Saturn, solar arc Uranus opposition his Mars, he is under a lot of pressure, I think, or he will be under a lot of pressure. I need to look at it more closely, but at the moment, I'm not convinced that Jerome Powell is going to stay as chair of the Federal Reserve long term. I think that over the course of 2025, his position, for one reason or another, might become untenable. Now, as far as Jerome Powell and how he links with the Federal Reserve, so here's a chart of the Federal Reserve, and so if we look at, we put Federal Reserve in the middle, put Jerome Powell on the outer wheel. See, that's there's the Federal Reserve's midheaven at 0 degrees 22 Aries. So Paul Volcker had his his Jupiter and Jupiter-Uranus conjunction on the Federal Reserve's midheaven. Jerome Powell has got his Venus-Mars conjunction on the midheaven of the Federal Reserve. And I think that Mars is possibly a problem. Even that Venus is a problem because Jerome Powell has Venus in Aries. So Venus is in its detriment in Aries. And at this stage, you'll probably have noticed 0 degrees 22 Aries. Saturn and Neptune are moving into Aries. So the Federal Reserve is about to have Saturn and Neptune hitting that midheaven. And so I think there could be problems in the Federal Reserve coming up next year. Now, those problems could be about some economic crisis that has to be dealt with. That's one possibility, or some stock market event where they feel they have to intervene. It could be the fact that Trump has decided, is trying his hardest to undermine the Federal Reserve. That is also a possibility. Remembering that there is a view on the right that the Federal Reserve should not exist. And I think some of those people who believe the Federal Reserve shouldn't exist do have the ear of Donald Trump. Anyway, I will be talking more about the Federal Reserve in the months to come. But for the moment, that's all I'm going to say on the subject. So thank you very much for listening to this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.